They say children know exactly who to ask when the world stops making sense. The rain tapped softly against the tinted windows of my black SUV as Manhattan blurred into streaks of gold and silver outside. It was nearly 11:30 at night, and after 14 hours of meetings, negotiations, and responsibilities that came with building an empire no one ever spoke about in public, all I wanted was silence. My driver had just turned onto the private road leading toward my estate when I saw something impossible standing beneath the glow of a street lamp. A little girl. She couldn't have been older than 6. She wore a yellow raincoat that hung awkwardly from her tiny shoulders and clutched a pink backpack so tightly against her chest that her knuckles had turned pale. Even through the rain, I could see she was shivering. My security detail immediately moved to step outside when I raised my hand and told them to wait. Children didn't appear outside gated estates in the middle of the night without a reason. The moment I opened the car door, she looked up at me with large blue eyes that had clearly spent hours trying not to cry. There was something unusual about the way she stood there. She wasn't afraid of me. Everyone else usually was. She took one hesitant step forward and spoke in a voice so small it almost disappeared beneath the rain. "Mister, everyone says you're a bad man." I nearly smiled at the honesty of children. They had a habit of saying things adults were too polite or too afraid to admit. Then she tightened her grip around her backpack and asked a question I would remember for the rest of my life. "Bad men are supposed to find missing people, right?" The words settled heavily in the cold night air. "My mommy has been missing for 3 days." For the first time in years, I had no immediate answer. She reached into her backpack and carefully pulled out a photograph protected inside a clear plastic sleeve. It showed a smiling young woman sitting beside her daughter on a park bench somewhere in Central Park during autumn. Her mother had soft blonde hair and kind eyes that belonged to someone who probably spent more time worrying about others than herself. On the back of the photograph, written in blue ink, were 3 simple words. "Love you forever." "Everyone says the police are busy," the little girl whispered. "My teacher says grown-ups are trying their best. But Mommy always comes home. She promised she'd never leave me." I looked down at the child standing alone in the rain, and realized something that made my chest tighten in a way I wasn't familiar with. She hadn't come here because she trusted me. She came here because she had run out of everyone else. In a city filled with millions of people, a 6-year-old little girl had decided that the most dangerous man she had ever heard about might be the only person willing to bring her mother home. The little girl introduced herself as Lily Carter while sitting quietly in the back seat of my SUV with both hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate that one of my security officers had found in the kitchen after we arrived at the estate. She thanked everyone politely before apologizing for getting rainwater on the leather seats, as if she had somehow become an inconvenience simply for existing. Children were not supposed to apologize for needing help. Not at 6 years old. The grandfather clock in my study struck midnight as I sat across from her and watched her carefully open her pink backpack. Inside were things that looked painfully ordinary. A small stuffed rabbit missing one button eye. A half-eaten package of crackers. A school folder decorated with colorful stars. And 3 photographs of her mother tucked neatly into a side pocket. Lily placed them on my desk one by one with the seriousness of someone presenting evidence in a courtroom. Emily Carter. 29 years old. Blonde hair. Blue eyes. A housekeeper employed by one of Manhattan's wealthiest families for almost 4 years. Single mother. No criminal record. No financial problems. No history of disappearing without explanation. My head of security entered the room carrying a tablet containing the preliminary report my team had assembled in less than 20 minutes. Emily Carter had been reported missing 3 days earlier by her employer. The police considered her disappearance voluntary after discovering that she had left work early that afternoon and had not returned home. Her employer had informed authorities that Emily appeared stressed in recent weeks and may have decided to leave the city. The case had quickly gone cold. Lily shook her head before anyone could finish explaining. "My mommy does not break promises," she said quietly while staring down at her stuffed rabbit. "She always kisses my forehead before bedtime. She always leaves me notes in my lunchbox. She always comes home. There was no hesitation in her voice. Only certainty. Children know the routines of love better than anyone. They notice every small promise adults keep without realizing it matters. Emily's neighbors described her as kind and hardworking. She volunteered at Lily's elementary school twice a month and never missed a parent-teacher conference. Her landlord said she spent most weekends baking cookies with her daughter. Nothing about her life suggested someone preparing to disappear. Then one detail caught my attention. Emily had left her apartment without her wallet, without her car keys, and without the silver necklace Lily said she wore every single day since her daughter was born. People who choose to leave their lives behind do not usually forget the things they treasure most. Lily pulled a folded birthday card from her backpack and carefully placed it in front of me. The colorful letters were written in uneven handwriting. Happy birthday, Mommy. I love you to the moon and back. Emily's birthday had been 2 days ago. The card had never been opened. Lily looked up at me with tired eyes that belonged to someone carrying far more worry than a child ever should. Do grown-ups ever stop looking for people when they are poor? She asked softly. I could not answer her question honestly without admitting something ugly about the world we lived in. Instead, I picked up the photograph of Emily Carter and made a decision. Someone had stopped looking for her. I had not even started. I have spent my entire life watching people lie. Politicians lied with practiced smiles. Billionaires lied behind polished handshakes. Criminals lied because survival demanded it. Children, however, rarely lied about the people they loved. At 6:30 the next morning, Manhattan was waking beneath a blanket of gray clouds when I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my study reviewing everything my team had uncovered overnight. Emily Carter had lived a remarkably ordinary life, which made her disappearance even more extraordinary. She worked 6 days a week for one of the city's most influential families on the Upper East Side. Her employment records described her as punctual, dependable, and beloved by the children she occasionally cared for. She had never missed a day of work without notice. She paid her rent on time every month. She shopped at the same neighborhood grocery store every Saturday morning. She attended every school event Lily participated in and volunteered at the public library's children's reading program twice each month. People like Emily did not simply walk away from their lives without leaving a single word behind. I took my first sip of coffee when another report landed on my desk. Emily's bank account had not been touched in 72 hours. Her cell phone had been turned off sometime during the afternoon she disappeared. More importantly, security footage from her apartment building showed her leaving work carrying her usual canvas tote bag and smiling at her elderly neighbor before stepping into a black town car that did not belong to her employer. No one thought much about it at the time. Manhattan was filled with black cars. Yet something about the image bothered me. She did not appear frightened. She looked distracted, almost concerned, as if she had received unexpected news and rushed to help someone. Lily spent the morning sitting at the kitchen counter coloring pictures beside the estate's head housekeeper. Every few minutes she would ask if there had been any news about her mommy. When I finally joined her for breakfast, she carefully slid a drawing across the table toward me. It showed 3 stick figures standing beneath a bright yellow sun. One figure had blonde hair. One had brown hair wearing a black suit. The smallest held both of their hands. "That is us when Mommy comes home," she explained shyly. "I know she will be scared when she gets back, so I drew her smiling." Children possess an extraordinary ability to believe in happy endings long after adults have stopped trying to find them. Before I could respond, my chief of security entered the dining room carrying another file. Emily had recently visited her employer's office building after hours on 3 separate occasions over the past month. She was not scheduled to work during any of those visits. The building's receptionist remembered her looking upset after one particular meeting. When asked if anything was wrong, Emily had simply smiled and said she was trying to do the right thing. The right thing. 4 simple words that had changed countless lives throughout history. Somewhere in the city, a kind woman had chosen to do the right thing and disappeared shortly afterward. I looked down at Lily as she happily added a small pink heart between the figures in her drawing. "Will you really find her?" she asked softly. I knelt beside her chair and answered with a promise I had no intention of breaking. "Lily, your mother is not alone anymore. From this moment forward, neither are you." And for reasons I could not yet explain, I realized that finding Emily Carter had become far more than a favor for a little girl standing in the rain. It had become personal. By the afternoon of the second day, my people had quietly assembled a timeline of Emily Carter's final 48 hours before she vanished. What began as an ordinary missing persons case was slowly becoming something far more complicated. Emily had recently requested copies of financial documents from her employer's office on 2 separate occasions. She had also contacted a nonprofit organization that provided legal assistance for domestic employees working in affluent households throughout New York City. At first glance, none of it seemed unusual. Responsible people ask questions when something feels wrong. But Emily was not a lawyer or an accountant. She was a hardworking mother trying to build a stable life for her daughter. Something had motivated her to step outside the boundaries of her everyday routine. My investigators discovered that 2 weeks before her disappearance, Emily had quietly helped another employee file a workplace complaint involving unpaid wages. The complaint itself had been resolved quickly and legally, but it revealed something important about her character. Emily Carter was the kind of person who stood up for others, even when doing so made her own life more difficult. The more I learned about her, the easier it became to understand why her daughter believed so completely that she would never abandon her. That evening, Lily asked if she could call me Mr. Alexander instead of Mr. Mafia Boss because she had learned from television that mafia bosses did not usually drink hot chocolate with little girls at breakfast. I laughed for the first time in several days. Children had an uncanny ability to disarm even the most guarded people. She sat beside me in the library while reading one of her favorite picture books. Halfway through the story, she quietly asked whether adults become lonely when they grow up. The question caught me off guard. Before I could answer, she explained that her mommy always told her loneliness feels smaller when someone holds your hand. Emily had apparently spent years teaching her daughter kindness in small and beautiful ways. Later that night, another report arrived. Emily's cell phone had briefly connected to a cellular tower near Westchester County approximately 3 hours after she left work. The signal lasted less than 2 minutes before disappearing entirely. It was the first real lead anyone had found since she went missing. More surprisingly, witnesses near the area remembered seeing a woman matching her description speaking calmly with someone outside a private property before entering the residence voluntarily. There had been no signs of distress. No indication that anyone forced her to go anywhere. She had chosen to follow someone because she believed she was helping. I leaned back in my chair as the pieces slowly began to fit together. Emily had not disappeared because she was running away. She had disappeared because someone had asked for her help. Kind people are often willing to walk through unfamiliar doors if they believe someone else needs them on the other side. That truth has always been both their greatest strength and their greatest vulnerability. Before going to bed, Lily placed another drawing on my desk. This time, it showed a large house with lights glowing warmly through the windows. 3 figures stood together on the front porch smiling beneath a night sky filled with stars. In careful handwriting, she had written 6 simple words across the top of the page. "Mommy is coming home very soon." As I looked at her drawing, I realized something had quietly changed over the past 48 hours. This was no longer an investigation. It was a promise. And somewhere in New York, a woman who spent her life protecting others had no idea that an entire empire had begun searching for her. On the morning of the 3rd day, New York City felt unusually quiet from the windows of my office. Rain had finally given way to pale winter sunlight stretching across the skyline, but there was nothing peaceful about the reports scattered across my desk. Emily Carter had not disappeared from the world. She had simply vanished from the places where people knew to look. My investigators discovered that the private property connected to her last cell phone signal belonged to a charitable foundation that sponsored educational programs and community outreach projects throughout the state. On paper, It was beyond reproach. Its board members included respected business leaders and philanthropists whose names regularly appeared in newspapers besides stories about generosity and public service. Emily had volunteered at one of their family events almost 6 months earlier. More importantly, she had recently exchanged several emails with one of the organization's coordinators regarding concerns about financial assistance promised to several domestic workers that had mysteriously never reached the families involved. Emily had been quietly trying to help people who could not afford lawyers or powerful connections. It was exactly the sort of thing a woman like her would do without expecting anything in return. She believed honesty could fix broken systems if people simply cared enough to speak up. Unfortunately, the world does not always reward kindness immediately. Lily spent the afternoon helping the estate's pastry chef bake chocolate chip cookies because she insisted her mommy always made them whenever someone was sad. She carefully set aside the largest cookie and asked me to save it for Emily when she came home. Watching her stand on a chair while wearing an oversized apron was enough to remind me that somewhere, a mother was missing precious moments she could never get back. Children grow quickly. 3 days may seem insignificant to adults who measure time by calendars and business meetings, but to a 6-year-old little girl, 3 days can feel like an eternity. Later that evening, another piece of information arrived that changed everything. Security cameras near the charitable foundation had captured Emily entering the property carrying her canvas tote bag and speaking with an elderly woman outside the building. The footage showed Emily smiling gently before helping the woman carry several boxes through the front entrance. She looked exactly like every description I had been given over the past few days. Calm, kind, helpful. There was no fear in her expression because she believed she was doing something good. The elderly woman was later identified as a retired teacher who volunteered at the foundation and described Emily as one of the sweetest young women she had ever met. According to her statement, Emily had agreed to stay late that afternoon after learning several important documents connected to employee assistance programs had been misplaced and needed organizing. Then, sometime later that evening, Emily had simply stopped answering her phone. There were still far too many unanswered questions, but one truth had become impossible to ignore. Emily Carter's greatest strength had always been her willingness to help strangers. Somewhere along the way, that kindness had placed her on a path she never expected to walk. As I looked at Lily sleeping peacefully on the couch with her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her arm, I quietly made another promise to myself. The world had allowed Emily to spend her life protecting others. It was finally time for someone to protect her. The fourth morning brought something I had not expected to feel: anticipation. For years, my mornings had begun with business reports, security briefings, and endless schedules designed to keep an empire moving. Now, before I looked at financial projections or meeting requests, I found myself asking whether there had been any updates about Emily Carter. Somewhere between a little girl standing in the rain and countless hours spent following the quiet footprints of an ordinary woman, her story had become impossible to ignore. My security team arrived just after 7 o'clock with fresh information gathered overnight. Emily had maintained a notebook for nearly 2 years documenting charitable programs that promised assistance to working families throughout New York. It contained names, dates, and handwritten notes about mothers struggling to afford school supplies, elderly neighbors needing transportation to medical appointments, and domestic workers attempting to secure fair treatment in their workplaces. She had spent her free time helping strangers without posting photographs online or seeking recognition. The notebook revealed something even more remarkable. Emily regularly used a portion of her own modest income to anonymously purchase winter coats and school lunches for children at Lily's elementary school. No one had ever told her to do these things. She simply believed that kindness mattered. Lily proudly informed me that her mommy called it leaving sunshine in places that needed a little more light. Children often become reflections of the people raising them. The more time I spent around Lily, the more clearly I could see Emily's heart shining through her daughter. That afternoon, Lily insisted on helping me plant white roses in the estate's garden because her mommy loved flowers that symbolized new beginnings. She explained that whenever something difficult happened, Emily would tell her that life has a funny way of sending unexpected people exactly when we need them most. I asked her if she was afraid. She thought carefully before answering. I miss my mommy every minute, she said softly. But I am not scared anymore. Because you promised me. There is something unsettling about realizing that a child trusts your word completely. Adults understand disappointment. Children simply believe promises should be kept. Later that evening, one of my investigators discovered that several individuals connected to the charitable foundation had quietly relocated operations to a private retreat property outside the city during the same week Emily disappeared. There was nothing criminal or dangerous about the location itself. It regularly hosted volunteer workshops and community programs. However, no official records explained why Emily had traveled there or why communication with her had suddenly stopped afterward. We were getting closer to understanding what happened, but perhaps more importantly, we were beginning to understand who Emily Carter truly was. She was not simply a missing woman. She was a devoted mother, a loyal friend, and someone who carried the burdens of others without ever asking anyone to carry her own. As the sun disappeared beyond the Manhattan skyline, I found myself looking once more at the family drawing Lily had left on my desk. 3 figures smiling outside a warm home beneath a sky full of stars. Somewhere, Emily was still waiting to come back to the little girl who believed in her without question. And for the first time in a very long time, I realized I was waiting for her too. The following morning, a thin layer of snow covered the estate's gardens, transforming the sprawling grounds into something that looked almost peaceful. Lily pressed her small hands against the kitchen window and smiled when she saw the white roses dusted with snow. Mommy says snow makes everything look softer, she told me as she climbed onto her chair for breakfast. She likes winter because people smile more when they come inside where it is warm. I wondered how many small pieces of wisdom Emily Carter had quietly planted in her daughter's heart over the years. By now, nearly everyone working within my household knew Lily's favorite hot chocolate recipe, and which bedtime stories made her laugh the hardest. Somehow, without anyone intending for it to happen, she had become part of our daily lives. My chief investigator entered my office shortly before 9 o'clock carrying the first genuinely hopeful report we had received. Records from the private retreat property outside New York revealed that Emily had volunteered to assist with organizing community outreach materials during a weekend workshop. According to several volunteers, she immediately noticed discrepancies involving scholarship applications and emergency assistance funds intended for struggling families. Emily had privately requested clarification from the organization's administrators rather than publicly raising concerns. She had chosen compassion and discretion, believing there must be a simple explanation. That sounded exactly like the woman we had come to know through the stories others shared about her. More importantly, witnesses recalled Emily mentioning her daughter repeatedly throughout the weekend. She showed photographs of Lily to nearly everyone she met, and spent an entire lunch break discussing her plans to take her daughter ice skating once winter break began. She had purchased matching scarves for the occasion only days before she disappeared. People preparing to abandon their children do not spend their final conversations making holiday plans. One volunteer remembered Emily saying something that remained with me long after reading the report. "I do not have much money," she had laughed softly, "but I think my daughter is growing up in a very rich home because she is surrounded by love." It struck me that Emily measured wealth differently than most people I knew. She counted kindness instead of bank accounts, and memories instead of possessions. That afternoon, Lily asked if she could help decorate the estate's enormous Christmas tree because her mommy always allowed her to place the star on top each year. While carefully hanging handmade ornaments she had created in kindergarten, she stopped suddenly and looked up at me. "Do you think Mommy knows I am okay?" she asked quietly. "I do not want her to worry about me." It was such a selfless concern for a 6-year-old child that I found myself struggling to answer immediately. "I think," I finally said, "that your Mommy knows." She raised a very brave little girl. Later that evening, we received confirmation that Emily had been seen boarding a shuttle from the retreat property after helping another volunteer carry supplies into storage. She appeared healthy, smiling, and carrying the same canvas tote bag she always used. Someone remembered hearing her say she needed to get home quickly because Lily had a school art project they planned to finish together that evening. She was coming home. She intended to come home. Somewhere between the shuttle ride and her front door, something unexpected had changed her path. As I sat alone in my study watching snow fall softly outside, I realized that Emily Carter had spent her entire life showing up for everyone else. It was time someone showed up for her. 3 days later, the city finally whispered back. It was just after 6 o'clock in the evening when my phone rang as I stood in the estate's library watching Lily color snowflakes onto construction paper. My chief investigator rarely allowed excitement to show in his voice, which was why the urgency in his tone immediately captured my attention. A woman matching Emily Carter's description had been identified at a small community center nearly 90 miles north of Manhattan. According to staff members, she had arrived several days earlier after experiencing extreme exhaustion and dehydration while attempting to assist another volunteer traveling home from the retreat property. During an unexpected winter storm that disrupted transportation throughout the region, Emily had become separated from her belongings, including her phone and wallet. The community center, which primarily assisted stranded travelers and local families during severe weather conditions, had provided her with temporary accommodations while waiting to restore communication services that had been unavailable in the area due to storm damage. She had spent the entire time helping prepare meals and organizing donations for other guests staying there. I closed my eyes briefly as relief settled over me. Of course, Emily Carter had spent the worst week of her life helping other people. Even stranded far from home with no way to contact her daughter, kindness remained her first instinct. The community center director described her as one of the most compassionate people she had ever met. Emily had apparently spoken about Lily every single day and had been desperately trying to reach New York once transportation routes reopened. She carried a photograph of her daughter in her coat pocket and told anyone willing to listen that her little girl must be worried sick. When I walked back into the library, Lily immediately noticed something had changed in my expression. Children are remarkably perceptive when it comes to hope. "Did you find my mommy?" she asked softly, gripping her blue crayon tightly between her fingers. I knelt beside her and smiled for what felt like the first time in weeks. "We found her, Lily." Tears immediately filled her eyes before she threw her small arms around my neck. "I told everyone she would come home," she whispered through happy tears. "I knew she would." The following morning, a black SUV quietly made its way toward the community center as snow continued falling gently across the countryside. For days I had come to know Emily Carter through photographs, stories, and the extraordinary little girl she raised. Soon, I would finally meet the woman who had unknowingly changed the rhythm of my entire world without ever speaking a single word to me. Somewhere inside that modest building was a mother counting the minutes until she could hold her daughter again. And for reasons I was only beginning to understand, I found myself counting those minutes with her. Sometimes, the people who spend their lives rescuing everyone else forget that they deserve to be found too. The moment the doors of the community center opened, I understood why everyone who met Emily Carter spoke about her with such quiet admiration. She stood near the reception desk wearing a cream-colored sweater that was slightly too large for her, and holding a cardboard box filled with children's books she had been organizing for the center's holiday donation drive. Her blonde hair was loosely tied back, and despite the exhaustion visible beneath her eyes, she smiled warmly at an elderly volunteer helping decorate a small Christmas tree in the corner of the room. She was not what the world expected when it imagined someone worth moving an empire to find. She was something infinitely rarer. She was kind. When she learned who I was and why I had come, the color immediately drained from her face. Her first words were not about herself. They were about her daughter. "Is Lily okay?" she asked before I could introduce myself. I smiled and handed her the photograph Lily had insisted I bring with me. "She has been waiting for you every single day," I told her softly. Tears filled her eyes as she pressed the photograph against her chest. During the drive back to New York, Emily apologized repeatedly for causing so much worry. She explained that after the winter storm disrupted transportation and damaged communication services in the area, She had borrowed phones whenever possible but could not remember Lily's school contact information or reach anyone she knew in the city. Rather than sitting helplessly and waiting, she volunteered at the community center while trying to return home. Somehow, even when life became difficult, she continued finding ways to help others. When we finally arrived at the estate, Lily spotted the SUV before it had completely stopped moving. She raced across the front steps with tears streaming down her face as Emily stepped out of the vehicle. Their reunion was everything beautiful about love in its purest form. Emily dropped to her knees and wrapped her daughter in the kind of embrace only mothers can give, holding her tightly as both of them laughed and cried at the same time. Lily proudly announced that she had never stopped believing her mommy would come home because promises made by good people always matter. In the weeks that followed, Emily and Lily became frequent visitors at the estate. Christmas decorations slowly filled the halls, and laughter replaced the silence that had lived there for far too many years. Emily eventually told me that kindness is never wasted, even when it feels unnoticed. Sometimes it simply takes longer to find its way back to you. She was right. I spent my entire life building something powerful, because I believed strength alone could protect the things that mattered. Then a little girl carrying a pink backpack appeared outside my gates on a rainy night, and taught me that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is keep a promise. I found Emily Carter because her daughter refused to give up on her. Somewhere along the way, they found something in me that I thought had been lost long ago. Home was never the estate I built overlooking Manhattan. Home was waiting for someone to come back. And sometimes, the people we rescue are the very ones who rescue us in return.